Hi, my name is Taryn Wagner, and I will be doing my presentation on Salvador Dali. To start with, he was born on May 11th, 1904, in Figueres, Spain. He also died there on January 23rd, 1989. I wanted to start with this quote from Salvador Dali because it just exemplifies who he was as a person and the type of art he was trying to convey to people. It really gives a good explanation on who he was as a person. And it says, "The fact that I myself, at the moment of painting, do not understand my own pictures does not mean that these pictures have no meaning. On the contrary, their meaning is so profound, complex, coherent, and involuntary that it escapes the most simple analysis of logical intuition." And as we go on with this presentation, I really think that this quote will have significant meaning when we go through his paintings, and you'll really see the types of meanings he was trying to portray to his viewers. I really wanted to start with the book information and how I got this picture to decide that I wanted to do Salvador Dali. This picture is called The Persistence of Memory, and it was made in 1931, and this is really the picture that showed Salvador Dali's surrealist views, because you can see here that there's a lot of imagery that we would not sort of call realistic in our own views. For example, the clocks in this picture are limp and useless, but for us as humans, we view these clocks as devices of knowing and a means of external order. So to see them limp and useless like this does not really make sense in our own minds. Even the landscape and how empty it is and different things like that. Nothing really makes sense, but Dali painted everything with so much detail and convincing realism so that the knowledge that we know just fades in importance when we look at a scene with this kind of new idea. Even the swarming ants and flies can allude to horror and dimension that dreams can give us. So, like I mentioned in that last picture, that's what kind of gave Dali a signature in surrealism. But surrealism is an artistic movement in the 1920s to 1930s that originated in Europe following the horrors of the war and increase in industrialization. You can even see in this picture the surrealist ideals that this one has with the floating head. It's left to our imagination of this imagery that's more dreamlike, and there's so much that goes into surrealism. Like it says, it aims to challenge reality by depicting this warped, irrational world filled with surprising and bizarre features. So surrealism as a whole, it does not fit any sort of box or any sort of picture perfect ideal to what it is, because it can be symbols, collage, dream imagery, juxtaposition, different things like that. And I think this next picture that we're going to really explains what surrealism is as a whole, because it can be so many different things. This picture by Salvador Dali in 1936 is called The Lobster Telephone. And I think this picture alone can describe what surrealism is as a whole, because we've seen a few other paintings and pictures like that. But when we see a telephone and a lobster, we're like, what is this? But Salvador Dali's goal was to provide this extreme juxtaposition that there is so many different meanings to this. And for Salvador Dali, this picture almost had a sexual connection that he tried to convey through it. But for me, when I see these two objects, it really just shows how extreme the imagery and the different symbols you can have in pictures that can be famous for how opposite they are. Because when you look at a lobster and a telephone, they don't have anything in common. But to see them put together like this, you can use it like he intended for sexual connection, different things like that. But when we see it, it really does provide that juxtaposition of two objects that can be put together in a portrait sculpture like this one. So for when and where, in the 1930s, Dali created his own method, actually called the paranoid critical method, to redefine the Breton theory of automatism, which was what Surrealism was going off of the time and how they kind of viewed their method for their pictures. And then he would actually use this style his whole life. But the beginning of these works in the 30s were very popular, especially in Paris, where he started his career. You can see in this picture the soft construction with boiled beans was actually one of his most popular surrealist pieces in 1936. But he believed that his viewers would find intuitive connection to his work because the subconscious language in surrealism was universal. He quoted, "It speaks with the vocabulary of the great vital constants, sexual instinct, feeling of death, physical notion of the enigma of space. These vital constants are universally echoed in every human." And I think you really see that in this picture because it does have all of those constants. And you saw in the pictures before that there are sexual desires in these pictures, feelings of death, different physical stuff of the space that's provided. So, like the boiled beans contrasting the rest of the picture. It's just diving into this imagery that you would not suspect in realistic photos. Salvador Dalí also would then go on to traveling to the US and different parts of the world to continue to redefine his style and move on to different areas that would continue to define his work. So, a little bit more about who he was. He started taking art classes at age 10. He enrolled in Madrid School of Fine Arts and then enrolled at the Special Painting, Sculpture, and Engraving School of San Fernando in Madrid. And these all would hold different places to him because they all had an impact on the type of art that he was doing at the time and the way he developed his personality and artwork as being loud and flamboyant. This also would have to do with his schooling ability because he did get kicked out of a lot of schools. And I think that with his loud personality towards his painting, it also showed in his real life with schooling and different things like that. But meeting Pablo Picasso did have a lot of impact on him because he was interested in Cubism and different styles like Impressionist, Pointillist, but it goes to show how this would all impact his style to later his first serious work in 1927 called The Apparatus in Hand. And here's The Apparatus in Hand in 1927, and this picture really shows a lot to what his future works would contain in regards to what the picture actually holds. So this picture has symbolic imagery, dreamlike landscape, which we kind of saw in the first picture that I showed. And this would become his painting signature. So he had a ton of different things with this imagery and symbolism and different things like that that would go to hold his painting signature for the years to come. So continuing talking about his inspiration and like the last one, The Apparatus in Hand, this picture also holds a lot of significance to Salvador Dalí because in 1928, before this picture was made, Dalí actually partnered with this filmmaker, Luis Buñuel, and this film's subject matter was very sexual and political, and it shocked so much of Paris that he kind of became famous for this type of art, and especially with the surrealists in Paris at the time, because this picture actually depicts a female figure that Dalí was interested in at the time. His muse, her name was Gala, and she's rising from the head symbolically of the type of fantasy a man would conjure while engaged in this practice suggested by the title during this time. And so for this piece, it holds a lot of personal significance and just a lot of imagery that has a deeper level, but also a personal connection to Salvador Dalí. And it just led to a whole different avenue of surrealism at the time, which would pave a way for him in Paris and then around the world to travel with different surrealists. I also wanted to add this piece of artwork because it is actually a photograph called the Dalí Atomicus. And this picture shows a lot because Dalí didn't just stay in one box, like I mentioned before. This was a photograph, and you can kind of see the surrealism in this photograph with the cats, the water. It kind of looks like he's suspended in midair, different things like that. And Just to see that he would team up with a photographer named Felipe Halsman to create this famous photo just shows how ambitious and creative he was as a person and as an artist. He didn't just do portraits, but he also experimented with photography. I also found extreme interest in this artwork of his called the Corpus Hypercubus in 1954 because, again, it is a very non-traditional surrealist portrait, and it is Christ on a hypercube, which has a really big play on mathematics and religion at the time because Dalí was struggling with what type of art he wanted to portray. And for this, it was, science mixed with religion, and it expresses some personal conflict, but it also has a lot of different avenues that you can try to comprehend. Because at this time, Dalí did believe in God, and science told him that God was real, but he didn't really have a faith to understand. And I think that this picture really depicts that as a person and who he was dealing with his religious conflicts. And then this is the Dalí Museum, which I found to be very interesting because you can see this dome that it has the persistence of memory on the outside. Really cool. And just the design of this is not one dimensional. It has a lot going on, which I think also shows Salvador Dalí as a person, and even the architecture of this relates to him. But also the fact that there is this dome, and then there's also this piece to this museum, the Ask Dalí, which is like an AI of him as an artist responding in different ways that he would have. So you get to meet a little bit of his personality when asking about his artwork and different things like that. I thought that was a really cool piece to the technology of this museum and just the types of surrealist work that it offers, but how Salvador Dalí paved the way for surrealism in a way that there is this huge museum in Florida that you're able to go to see over 100 works of surrealism. And then just to finish with some more important information, I think it's really important to add a picture of Salvador Dalí, and just so you could see him as a person and kind of put a face to all of the designs. And this is him with his ocelot, which I think was very interesting because he was an interesting character. And then you can see him painting this portrait called The Face of War, and just seeing what goes into painting such an extreme picture like this one, and the depth that goes into it from his creative imagination, but also the horrors and the different imagery that this type of important image can hold and portray to its viewers. Also, again, another look at the Dalí Museum just to show the significance and the insane architecture that it had to Americans and just the importance that Salvador Dalí had to the world. And here are my references.